Hi, I'm Dr. Neil Cox from the University of Reading, and this is the second in my 3 short talks on Frankenstein. And if you haven't seen the first talk, go back and check it out. It'll kind of explain what's going on a little bit. In the last talk, I was looking at a quote from early on in the text, one of Warton's letters to his sister about first meeting Frankenstein. And I was thinking about the problems of narration it introduces, the difficulty of the narrational frame. Because according to Warton's letter, anyone that doesn't know Frankenstein, anyone that wasn't there to hear him speak, is going to receive an experience of the story that he tells that's kind of oddly lacking. If you haven't heard his full-tone voice, if you don't know him, it's not kind of going to be the same. But we were discussing, actually, in the end it plays out as something very different, because what Warton ends up praising is not so much the experience of being there and listening to someone speak, but a kind of a fantasy of an experience of reading a text that is yet to be written years in advance and getting a kind of a pleasure from it. I think one of the ways we can think about this odd kind of setup is, as I said in the past lecture, is just to think about it in terms of the general structure of a Gothic frame. Many Gothic texts have got this setup where there's a story within a story, and often kind of letters are involved. And one of the things that gives us is the sense of a story that's fragmentary. We haven't got that kind of certain third-person narration that knows exactly what's going on from a single point of view, but instead something that is obscure, multiple, unknowable. It can't offer us up the certainty of a kind of a literary object. But there's actually quite a few different critical ways of thinking about this, and I just want to very briefly talk about a couple of them. In his kind of classic study of the Gothic and the Sublime, Andrew Smith talks about this whole sequence in Frankenstein in terms of his wider project of reintroducing the idea of the sublime into Gothic study. And I very much recommend that book. But essentially, I guess what he's saying here is that the experience of the sublime is very disconcerting, and it's an experience with something that is in some sense unfathomable. It kind of defies understanding in some way. And that's what's happening both to Frankenstein and to Warton. And the response, oddly enough, not just in this text, but in other texts around this time, is a move towards communication. The anxiety caused by experiencing something that defies understanding is actually a move from the inside to the outside, a move to dissemination, to communication. This is what Andrew Smith writes at one point. It is the failure of Victor's science which provokes his confessional narrative, one which emphasises the communication and the social bonding which that implies are more important than any selfish aspirations. And one direction, I think, thinking about these letters and this whole structure is thinking about it in terms of the context of dissemination, communication, the social, as opposed to the inner. I want to think a little more detail about another very, very famous approach, probably perhaps the most famous approach to and reading of this text by the great post-colonialist theorist Spivak in her great essay, Three Women's Texts. In this, Spivak is very justifiably critical of many aspects of Frankenstein, seeing in it a kind of a repetition of many colonial structures. But she also sees in the text a kind of a complexity, perhaps a seductive complexity, but a complexity nonetheless, which kind of worries or disturbs some of the other elements. What she's particularly interested in is Wharton's sister, the excellent Margaret. Because she kind of compares it to Jane Eyre, Jane Eyre, Bronte's Jane Eyre. That can be seen as a text which positions a certain kind of individualized female subject against a kind of an othered, monstrous, inhuman, and non-European subject. One of the things that Jane Eyre does is there's Jane and there's this kind of the mad woman, the attic, her sort of strange double. And that opposition is set up along racial lines. It's set up along lines of humanity and its other. And the individualized kind of female subject, Western subject, is shored up against this other that's monstrous. Essentially, what Spivak is saying is something curious happens with the letter. Because just as the creature itself at the end of the novel is lost in darkness and distance, the excellent Margaret also kind of curiously doesn't appear in the text on her own terms. She's also placed beyond the boundaries of the text within the text. Both the creature and the sister, the white European woman, are beyond the boundaries, in a position of otherness. The usual opposition that sees a kind of individualized Western white female subject against the monstrous is problematized, and there is this doubling of position. This is what Spivak writes. I would now suggest there is a framing woman in the book who is neither tangential nor encircled nor yet encircling Mrs. Saville, excellent Margaret, beloved sister, or her address and kinship inscriptions. She is the occasion, though not the protagonist of the novel. She is the feminine subject rather than female individualist. She is the irreducible recipient function of the letters that constitute Frankenstein, the novel. I've commented on the singular appropriate hermeneutics of the reader reading with Jane in the opening paragraph pages of Jane Eyre. Here the reader must read with Margaret Saville in the crucial sense that she must intercept the recipient function, read the letters as a recipient, in order for the novel to exist. Margaret Saville does not respond to close the text as frame. The frame is thus simultaneously not a frame, and the monster can step beyond the text and be lost in darkness. Within the allegory of our reading, the place of both the English lady and the unnameable monster are left open by this great flawed text. It is satisfying for a post-colonial reader to consider this a noble resolution for a 19th century English novel. This is all the more striking on the anecdotal level Shelley herself abundantly identifies with Victor Frankenstein. What has been located here is a kind of a brilliant, unsettling sense of a subject identity which is not enclosed, which is open, which escapes. There's something about the monster escaping at the end and Margaret, the sister, always waiting, seemingly, to be the recipient of this novel, and the way that we as readers kind of are positioned in relationship, therefore, to her and the monster, which is potentially subversive. My thought on this, thinking back to our first chat, is about the idea that Margaret, the sister, is not unambivalently, is not certainly the recipient of this text. Indeed, in terms of Victor's letters, the framing of the whole novel, he himself is the recipient. He himself is that which awaits the final and perhaps most perfect reading of this novel. What does that thought do? Does it subvert? Does it question Spivak's reading? Or instead, does it point to something that's actually argued for in its reading of those texts? That there is a problematization of identity, of clearly demarked identity here. And even though, crucially, Wharton, for example, is opposed to Margaret, just as Victor is opposed to the creature. This is a novel that can never quite keep those things distinct. Even transcendence, even otherness.